Yeah, so I think I'm going to give a quick overview of the core structure of CCG's modeling portfolio. We have quite a wide range of tools covering the whole data-to-deal process. But the focus of today's session is really the sort of launch of some of our new financial tools. So this is an overview of the modeling process within data-to-deal. As you'll see on the left-hand side, we see data-to-deal as really more of a cyclical process. It's a never-ending, rolling sort of process of moving from the modeling to stakeholder engagement, validating the model, to the financing of projects. And all of this is, in fact, happening simultaneously. So it's really important to make sure that as the models are developed, there is that country ownership and that they actually lead to tangible results within the country. So this is where really the development of the financing tools that you see in blue has come in. It's moving from energy system models, clues, which is, as we've covered, climate, land, energy, and water, and also SIBs, which covers the social benefits as well as sort of a lot of the flexibility analysis, and then moving this towards what does that mean when it comes to actually financing projects and producing these in-country. So just to run through the long list of tools that are held by CCG at the moment, these are all open source. There tends to be capacity building and resources available to pick up and use these tools as freely as possible. So we cover three main sort of umbrellas. So there's GIS, which is the spatial aspect of this. So this covers, quite importantly, I guess, onset, which is grid development. We have on-stove, which is similarly uptaking of clean cooking in countries. And then we have NISMOD as well. And then we also have techno-economic tools. So these cover tools that you will have heard quite a lot about recently. So most notably, I would say osmosis and clues do the analysis of both energy system development, specifically for osmosis, and then clues expands this through that framework to land, energy, and water as well. But we also have MADE, which is an IAEA tool for demand projections, Flex tool for analyzing the sort of robustness of some of these scenarios, and PathCalc, which is quite a nice interface to assess carbon trajectories. Lastly, and this is a bit more the focus of this talk, we have the financial tools. So these cover FFRM, which was initially a World Bank developed tool, which CCG has now translated. It was initially held in GAMS, which is unfortunately licensed, so it wasn't particularly accessible. We've now translated this into Python, and it should be usable by anyone with access to a computer. We have MinFin, the model for informing national finance. This is, at the moment, an Excel-based tool, but we are also, again, translating this into Python. We have FinPlan, which is the longest running of these tools, I would say. We've had quite a strong capacity building engagement for a number of years now with FinPlan. And this is an IAEA tool looking at project finance specifically. We have FinCore, which looks at costs of capital across countries and projecting that. And lastly, we have FinTrack, which is a climate finance tracker, which aims to take stock of the available climate finance, both globally and by country. So the capacity building offer that we have, as I mentioned, we do for all of these tools have a number of different engagements and resources available for stakeholders to be able to take up these tools and use them in their countries. Firstly, and probably the most accessibly, we have the OpenLearn collection. So you can, as of now, go onto OpenLearn, which is hosted by the Open University. You can pick up these tools, and they will have lectures on how to use the tools, lectures on the inputs on the tools. There are hands-on exercises to walk you through putting data into the tools, and there are sort of tests, quizzes to make sure that you understand the tool properly. And you can move forward with the tool. Next, we have the EMPs, or energy modeling platforms. We hold 4 of these annually around the world. We have EMP LAC, so Latin America. We have EMP APAC, held in the Asian Pacific. EMP-A for Africa, and lastly EMP-G, which is our global offer that's typically held in Trieste in Italy. And this is a chance for people who have completed the Open Learn collection to come in person and develop a very specific sort of country-tailored and personally tailored model for them to take back to their country and take forward in their own work. After they've completed the EMP, we also have an energy modeling community, and this is a resource that is available to alumni, where they can then both sort of cross-fertilize with their own knowledge, they can communicate with other alumni, and also communicate with trainers and experts in the use of the models to make sure that if they have any issues, these are addressed and they can progress with their work effectively. We also now have boot camps. So as was mentioned early in the introduction, there is a deficit of publications owned by Africans. So this is our attempt to address this. We offer engagement with and support through trainers to lead to the publication of a lot of these resources, and individuals can apply, and we offer to cover the costs of publishing this data. And all of this is sort of covered, and we'll hear more about this under partly the Flatpak program. So this is another resource that is available for universities to be able to take up resources relating to the tools and develop teaching programs within their institutions or universities to make sure that this knowledge is now passed on to young modelers and taken forward into institutions as they progress through their careers. But focusing on the financial tools, we have 3 new financial tools that we're launching as part of the EMP offer. This has Open Learn modules available as of right now. But we will be soon launching these at EMP-G, so in Trieste in Italy, we'll be launching these for the first time. And the 3 tools I want to talk about at the moment are FinTrack, FinCore, and MinFin. I won't go into too much detail because I have more slides covering these. But just to go into the first tool, FinTrack aims to take stock of the current global availability of climate finance, concessional finance, in order to help countries identify underutilized resources in terms of concessional loans, concessional grants, that may be able to address shortfalls in their current climate finance strategy. It's a complex landscape, and it's very often the case that countries either don't realize that they have access to these resources, or they don't fully understand the processes that are required to leverage access to this. So there are 3 main questions that FinTrack aims to address. Are they currently tapping into all of the climate finance funds available? So we do this by looking at historic uptake and potential allocations and comparing these. How favorable are the terms of finance that each of these resources offer? How concessional is it? What will it cost to borrow from these resources? And what are the hurdles facing countries when trying to access each of these pools of finance? So we have mapped the current climate finance landscape. It's a constantly adapting and evolving landscape, so this is something that will need to be updated continuously, year on year. But FinTrack currently, in its current version, covers more than 30 climate finance funds across both development finance and specific climate finance windows. At the moment, looking at the uptake, so we compare the current uptake with potential allocations. Low-income countries are currently uptaking around 30% of what they could potentially be uptaking. Middle-income countries are performing much better at 68%, and sub-Saharan Africa is performing similar to low-income countries at around 33% uptake of available resources. So there is still a lot of climate finance being left on the table that could be used more effectively and could be used to address these shortfalls. So FinTrack is ostensibly a large database of these climate finance windows. And what we do is we allow users to filter by country. So obviously when you're coming for your own country, you want to know what you can access for your own scenarios. We filter by whether it's a climate fund or a development fund commitment. We also filter by the stage, so whether that is project preparation, which is quite often a massively underfunded part of the whole process, whether it's pre-feasibility or whether it's an investment. We also then filter as to what sector each of these facilities cover. Obviously, they have their own agenda and their own sectoral targets, so not all of the funds available will apply to every sector, so we allow users to filter by that. Then we also have whether it is focusing on mitigation or adaptation finance. And lastly, we have the type of facility available, which is currently filtered between loans and grants. And once you apply these filters, FinTrack will return the list of funds available that meet each of these criterion. And then we rank funds. We assess funds on how well they perform, how concessional they are, how accessible they are, how complex they are, how large they are, to help stakeholders prioritize which funds to access first, which funds are possibly very small, very complex, not very accessible, and probably not worth the administrative cost of trying to pursue that fund. Whereas if there's a large pool of highly concessional, highly accessible finance, that's something that they should really be choosing to uptake first in their efforts. We take stock. This is a representation of the current global climate finance, with reds and blues indicating uptake ratios. So blue is finance that is currently being underutilized, whereas red indicates current climate finance that has been taken down by countries. And by applying this sort of merit order, we can see that, I mean, very often the highly concessional finance is highly fragmented and quite challenging to access, whereas there are larger pools of slightly less concessional finance, still very concessional finance, but they are possibly, it's a trade-off between the scale and the concessionality, really. And it's up to stakeholders and specific projects to assess where they draw the line, where they should target the access of these funds, especially when you're developing different size projects. If you're developing a very small project with high upfront costs when it comes to project preparation, you'll be looking much more at the grants. You don't care so much that it's highly fragmented because your project isn't huge. You don't need loads of finance. You just need enough to get your project to bankability. Whereas if you're doing a large infrastructural project, governments will want to look at larger volumes of finance. They'll want to leverage that towards their strategies. So we produce a number of figures to help visualize this, to help stakeholders really understand this. You can see here we have grant element at the bottom here. This is probably the single metric that makes it most understandable when it comes to how concessional finance is. I won't go into the formula because the maths looks quite scary, but it's just ostensibly how much of a loan falls below market rates, what percentage of a loan could be considered to be a grant. And different funds perform differently when it comes to this. So the higher the grant element, the more you want to assess or to use this finance. Equally, we also show the typical terms of finance that are associated with the different windows. So you typically attract an interest rate, a high interest rate bad, low interest rate good, a long loan term or a short loan term, and then whether or not there's a grace period typically associated with each of these windows. And we visualize this in graphs, we output it in figures, and we try to increase the transparency around what each of these facilities will typically offer. Then we also look at the complexity of accessing these funds. So depending on the concessionality, typically, more concessional funds will require more criteria when it comes to accessing the finance available. So we map what's normally quite a complex list of requirements onto 12 standardized requirements to assess whether or not each of these are either required or contribute to the access of this fund. And from this, we can assess which of the criteria are most impactful when it comes to accessing funds, which criteria require the most reform to then leverage the most capital within the country. So that really helps, we've found, to target policy reform to maximize the leverage of concessional finance within the country. And I'll talk through what each of these 12 are. So we have debt risk. So this is talking about the sustainability of debt within the country. Typically classified by the IMF, they have quite solid debt reports, as well as then we also have stakeholder engagement. So whether the project has successfully engaged with stakeholders in the development, whether there's been sufficient buy-in by government or private sector locally. We also have capacity, so whether or not a project feeds into developing domestic capacity, whether that's institutional or, again, private sector. We have policy, whether or not the project aligns with the long-term policy goals for the country. Planning, so whether or not the project aligns with the planning for the country and whether that planning is based on sound science. We have mitigation and adaptation, so aligning with either one of these criteria. Scalability, whether the project leads to further uptake of the technology within the country, whether it brings down the cost of capital for that technology within the country. Transformation, so this is both societal and economic transformation for the country. Feasibility studies, again, we talked about project preparation costs. Feasibility studies often fall under part of these pre-feasibility costs. So when it comes to investment finance, very often they will require this, and so you will have had to leverage that feasibility study in order to access that investment finance. Then we have whether or not there has been gender or social inclusion in the project development, project management, and then whether or not there is co-financing. So when we're talking about concessional international finance, very often they'll have targets for leveraging private finance as part of that. Very often they'll have specific ratios of private finance, so whether or not the project is meeting those criteria. Once we've mapped all of those very long list of criteria onto each of the available funds, we can start to look at a merit order of complexity against concessionality, against scale in a plot similar to this. And we can see that there is, to the right-hand side, there's very highly concessional, but very highly fragmented funds. And these fragmented funds, because of how limited they are, how concessional they often also attract the most criteria when it comes to accessing these funds. Whereas if you want to have less concessional funds, larger funds, but lower barriers to accessing the funds, then you can look at the sort of MDB commitments and the larger DFIs. Moving on to FinCore, the second of the tools that we look at. This was developed by one of our members, Luke Hatton, and is a means of calculating the cost of capital within different technologies based on country risks, based on technology risks, and we take sort of a stacking approach to work out the overall cost of capital. And we can project this into the future based on databases. So there are three main questions, again, that we want to look at. We want to look at what are the costs of capital facing project developers, how do these vary between projects and between technologies, and what are the main factors driving these high costs of capital, and how is the cost of capital likely to change in the short term? So this is up until about 2030. What are the trajectories for these costs of capital? So many of the clean technologies are quite capital intensive. They have low operating costs, but very often this translates instead to high debt financing costs and repayment costs. So FinTrack aims to take account of this and work out what the levelized cost of electricity might be throughout the project life based on these costs of capital. And very often there have been inaccurate cost assumptions based on different modeling and different insights, which has led to inaccurate estimates as to how competitive each of these technologies are. And FinCore aims to recalculate this, readdress this, and come out with new, relatively long-term projections of the cost competitiveness of different technologies. 10 minutes. I will speed up quite a lot because I'm not doing too badly. So FinCore covers around 176 countries. It is constantly expanding. Initially, we had a lot less countries, a lot less technologies, but with increased data transparency, it's been something that we've really managed to update and expand, and Luke has put in a lot of work for this. It currently includes 31 out of the 47 least developed countries, and it's really helped our modeling efforts in terms of informing the overall cost of capital in our projections, in our assumptions, both when we're looking at the financial modeling as well as informing discount rates in energy modeling as well. So this is how FinCore roughly estimates the cost of capital. It takes in a number of different rates and applies them and compounds them to work out the overall rate. So it uses the US Treasury yield as the risk-free rate, the country risk premium, as well as the technology penetration to inform the technology risk, And then for the cost of debt and cost of equity, we pull through a stacked overview of this, as well as applying an equity premium for equity borrowing as well. And it applies across 3 dimensions. So there is spatial. As I said, we cover quite a wide number of countries at this point and ever expanding. There is technological. So we cover both sort of renewable and some non-renewable, but this has expanded quite significantly in terms of the technology coverage. And then temporal, projecting up until 2030. So you can see year on year how these risks change and how the overall cost of capital is likely to change based on these projections. So FinCore explores a number of policy scenarios. So there is macroeconomic risk that is accounted for in FinCore. So you can add sensitivity around this. Market development, so how technology penetration may change cost of capital within the country. There is investor and lender risk. So whether or not investors are willing to take on higher risk in projects or whether they want to apply a higher margin. And then there is also financing structure, so how debt shares and tax reforms might impact the overall cost of capital for different technologies. And this is applied into the future and can be used to inform, as I said, our other models, such as MinFin, which is coming up next. So MinFin is probably the largest of the 3 tools that we're bringing out. It's the model for informing national finance. And what we've found is that with a lot of energy models, they care a lot about the upfront cost, the CapEx, but they seldom take the time or fully translate this into what the actual investment looks like and what repaying debt and equity obligations on these capital costs might look like. So whilst there are technologies that might have low upfront costs, they also may have quite significant costs of debt that realistically in the long term lead to them actually having a higher cost over the life of the technology. So we aim to assess this and assess how financeable these transitions actually are when we translate them into debt and equity financing. So the 3 questions we aim to answer are: how affordable is a net zero transition? We can do this in comparison to a number of different scenarios, so we can compare a net zero transition to a least cost transition. We also then look at how we can close financing gaps, so what policy reforms, what financing reforms might be required to close financing gaps. And we also look at how to allocate concessional and domestic capital. So when we talk about domestic capital, obviously there's a large amount of forex risk associated with international financing. So with the limited available domestic capital that mitigates that forex risk, how can we best allocate that across technologies to increase bankability? So we cover a number of sectors at the moment. We're doing energy sector primarily, but we also do transport sector as well. And we want to look at how least cost plans are not always financially feasible, but how realistically the cost of a low carbon plan might not be what you initially see when you look at just the CapEx. So we look at the cash flows generated within different technologies based on the tariff structure, based on PPA structures, and we assess what the actual real financing gap is based on each of the scenarios available. We also look at the financial constraints, so the limited availability of different sources of finance, so whether that's concessional or domestic finance, what the terms of finance are, and how they might be allocated, and then we look at what the overall gap, once we've translated all this into each of the scenarios, might be. And it produces a figure that looks something like this. So in black, we have the investment needs, so this is the upfront capital cost for the technology. So this is what you'd see just looking at something like osmosis or clues coming straight out. But then we also have the red line here, which is the financing requirement. So this is the repayment on your debt and equity obligations. And this is what would actually be experienced by project developers, either whether that's private or public project developers. And then lastly, in green, we have the availability of funding to service these debt and equity obligations. So this is based on public expenditure, based on revenues generated by electricity sales, based on grants and any other sources of funding that might be available within the sector. And we see both holistically across the sector as well as at a technology level whether realistically these projects are actually available or able to service their debt and equity obligations. So you can see at the beginning of this, it's affordable. We're above the red line with the green line. But after this, after around 2035, I think it is, the red line surpasses the green line. It's no longer financeable. I need to speed up. Yeah, so this is a breakdown of the different sources of financing. We translate it into debt and equity obligations across 4 different sources of financing: international concessional, international commercial, and then domestic concessional, domestic commercial. And how each of these interact overall leads to different capital structures. When we look at the funding availability, we have a breakdown here, so you can see which of these sources grows the most, whether it's revenue-based, whether it's grant-based, or whether it's subsidy-based, and how each of these interact, and what you can scale up to address these financing requirements. Then, as I said, we look at it at the technology level, so you can look across the sector and see which technologies are performing well, which technologies are performing badly, and which technologies may require either policy reform or subsidy, and how much you need to scale up that subsidy or policy reform in order to address these shortfalls, and whether you need to reallocate concessional finance from a technology that's doing very well to a technology that's doing very poorly. And that is the sort of main goal, and that's part of the optimization side of MinFin to address these allocation frameworks. As I said, we break down the funding and financing requirement, and we can see in figures such as this how each of those fall, where the main costs are experienced within each technology, and where the main revenues are generated within each technology. And this really helps us to assess whether technology is performing optimally. And we can also do a lot of scenario analysis around, say we want to change the OPEX, say we want to change tax rates, whether there's policy reform, corporate tax, whether there's fluctuations in fuel tax or fuel costs. Whether that's positive or negative, we can really assess the financing of these technologies overall. And talking about the reforms that are available, so we can talk about the commercial and concessional finance, changing the allocations of this. Each of these reforms has different implications when it comes to the speed of implementation and the ease of implementation within the sector. So you can see that reducing the cost of capital through commercial finance, this is not particularly easy. It's hard to turn around to commercial banks and say, lend at a lower rate. It comes down to policy reform, increasing the stability, reducing the risks within the country. Whereas if we were to increase the shares of concessional finance within a technology, that's a much faster process. That's something where we can turn around to DFIs and say, look, this technology is performing very well. Say solar is performing very well. It needs less concessional finance. And realistically, you ask any project developer, even if they're doing incredibly well, they'll say, we want concessional finance, we want grants, we want whatever. So it's up to policy and it's up to government to turn around and say, actually, they don't need the money, they don't need the concessional finance. It's these technologies that need the reform, that they need the support. Then we also have reassessing, so we feed back into the least cost investment plan. So when we do iterative modeling with clues, very often we'll turn around and say, look, this strategy, we've implemented all of these solutions, we can't address these shortfalls, so then maybe have a less ambitious scenario and see whether or not that is actually financeable. Additionally, we can raise government expenditure, not a particularly popular strategy, certainly with the government. It's a much faster solution, but as it says there, not the easiest to implement, to turn around to already strained government budgets and say spend more money on energy. Equally, increasing energy tariffs, not very popular, not very easy to implement, but again, faster. And I know a lot of countries have PPA crises at the moment, so it's not something where realistically you want to turn around and say higher tariffs. But monetizing carbon credits is quite an interesting one, and one that we are looking to explore in a bit more detail. And it's certainly one where there is quite an easy and fast way of adding capital into these energy markets. But again, it's something that requires quite a lot of policy reform and quite a lot of serious thought when it comes to scoping these. So my last 2 slides, because I'm sure I'm probably very close to running over.
Getting closer and closer to
So You can't steal it. So we've implemented this in Zambia in updating their IRP and assessing the financial feasibility of their IRP. So this is with MinFin, FinTrack, and FinCore. The publication is available for you to read. And Uganda, feeding off the back of Jairo's incredible work in Uganda, we have been doing a similar approach of assessing the transport sector with MinFin, FinTrack, and FinCore. These are the tools. These are where they are. Thank you very much.